Hi guys, welcome back to Z's Corner. This is Al. So I know I've been having some mic issues and there's been some kind of weird static with around the mic, and I think I finally figured out kind of why. Basically, I'm borrowing my daughter's MacBook Air to do all the video recording. I've got a better MacBook. I've got a MacBook Pro, but mine's a little bit old and doesn't have the USB-C connectors, so I haven't really bought a dongle yet to use to be able to use my MacBook. And I think the MacBook Air that she has doesn't have enough processing power when I'm running basically the stream, so the camera, in addition to trying to airstream over live, from the game. And that's kind of I think I'm running into the processor issue. So it's creating actually a lot of static when it's trying to capture the audio. And what I've done to try to fix that is that since the last video, actually, I'm recording a lot of what I want to show in game and just playing a video back and just speaking to the video. So it makes it a little bit challenging in terms of like pacing myself and the speed, which I have to speak. But at least you don't get as much. You still get a little bit, but you don't get as much of that static. So hopefully we can just kind of address that moving forward with maybe, I don't know, I might just go get a new laptop or something to kind of fix that. Or maybe I might just buy a dongle. That's probably the easiest way to do it. But anyway, on to the topic of today's video. As you can see on the screen right now, we're going to take a look at the lower decks video that I talked about before in my roadmap. And we're going to break it into a few parts because it's pretty complicated. I really want to kind of talk about how to crew lower decks, but then I figured out I couldn't really talk about that without talking about things like, the damage, how do you do like the weapon damage equation, how you look at mitigation, and then also how, the whole health and all that bonus stuff on the ships are calculated, and how your lower decks really affect that. So it's really come out to be a huge work in progress. So for today, the lower decks video that we're going to look at today is just part one, and we're actually going to focus more on the attack portion of it, and also how some of the officers there affect that, as well as the ship bonus ability. But more importantly, I'm actually going to explain in some detail, at least, how the weapon damage equation really works out, and we'll look at also a nifty tool that I created, and I'm putting online in a bit for you guys to check out as well. So with that, let's just jump right into it. So the overview right now is basically understanding ship stats. This is pretty simple. There's only attack, defense, and health, and they're basically fixed stats. We'll go over that pretty quick. The second point is at the attack damage equation, which is the focus of this video. And there's quite a bit of math here, so it's a little bit complicated. It's probably pretty easy to explain in words, but when you're trying to actually figure out what it is, it kind of gets pretty complicated with all sorts of different research you have to look up and see what you have. And it's actually the lower ops level you are, the easier it is to understand, because you just don't have that much research and that much, different variation factors that go into it. But I'll go over the entire equation in rather, hopefully not too boring detail. And then after that, we'll look at some damage officer procs and some examples. And this, we'll kind of talk about the damage officer procs and what type of ship they actually really work well on. And the examples I have, we're going to look at, I guess, we're going to look at it from the equation standpoint. But also we'll look at a couple of tests that I did in games against hostiles. So the first part I kind of alluded to was pretty easy. It's understanding ship stats. The attack is basically a set bonus to your weapon damage. That's all really it is. It's a set percentage bonus. So depending on what type of ship you have to get your total officer attack value. So whatever officers you have on the bridge, plus all the officers on your lower decks, whatever their total attack is, you get that type of bonus to your weapon damage. So if you can get it on a G3 Epic, it caps out at 300%. If you get that, then that 300%, then it's added in to your overall weapon damage equation, or into your attack weapon equation. So with the defense, it's also a set bonus. However, it only affects your primary mitigation stat, and that is based on ship stat class. So for explorers, all your defense bonus is really affecting is your shield deflection. Your on interceptors it's dodge, and on battleships it's armor. And this is actually to your advantage because in the mitigation equation that we will explore in I guess part 2 of the lower decks video, basically your primary mitigation stat accounts for over half, 0.55% of the total mitigation equation, plus or minus some other issues. So it's a pretty good thing to have your defense affecting just primary mitigation. And the last one is kind of health. This is a set bonus based on your research and all that, and based on your research and some other stuff to your hull and shield health. I haven't quite figured out completely yet the health component of this, so that will be, I guess, maybe a part 3 type video if it turns out to be complicated. If it's not too complicated, I may just throw it into mitigation and with defense and make it part 2, and we will just have a lower decks part 1 and lower decks part 2 video like that. So I'm working on that. There's a few things that haven't really added up for me, so I'm still kind of trying to go through all the math behind it. Anyway, back to the video we were talking about today. So here is the biggie. So this is the attack damage equation. Your final weapon damage is basically equal to a randomized base weapon damage. So your weapon damage has a min damage and a max damage, and what the game does is there's a random number generator, and apparently the code is custom code. So it comes out with some type of random value, and then you have this randomized base damage that's between the min and max, and this is multiplied by parentheses. This is going to be a mouthful, so it's 1 plus the sum. That's what that little fancy little Greek symbol means. The 1 plus the sum of all the research, territory, building, projectile, ship ability, direct officer, and and your ship attack bonus. So whatever all those percentages are, they're all percentages basically. Add all that up, and then plus 1. And then that's part of it. And then you have to subtract, I guess, parentheses of the sum of the all the damage reduction debuffs. Then this happens more primarily in PvP, and an example of that is basically like Saru's officer ability, Lorca's captain ability. So we have to take out all that from that number, and then after that you basically get a damage percent, and then you add on to, if you have a faction-specific attack officer, let's say Krell against Federation, then that officer's stat proc, so my Krell, let's say, is 500%. It's 500% times the total stat number. Krell is proccing off of defense, total officer defense on the ship. So if your officer defense was 10,000 and you have a 500% bonus, then it's 5 times 10,000, and you get 50,000 extra damage that gets directly added to whatever whatever the red part was. And then if you have critical hits, both of those numbers added together, let's say the first one was 20,000, the second one in my example was 10,000, it's 30,000, and then you times your critical hit damage bonus. And this, depending on research, I mean, the base, I think, is like 1.5, 1.55, something like that. So if you have research behind your ship classes, which most people do, it's around 200%. You'll multiply that number by 2. So if your crit hit is like, we were at 30,000 times 2, you go up to 60,000 weapon damage. And then if you have hull breach, then you have another multiplication, which is that 60,000 times 1 plus the hull breach crit bonus. And this is not really published, but it's a pretty significant value. And as an aside, I think this really makes hull breach a very a little bit overpowered type of ability, especially compared to morale, which has a hidden bonus of giving you increased penetration values, or even worst of all, burning, basically just 1% off of hull damage. But anyway, so if you have, so in our example, we were at like 60,000 critical hit damage times, and let's say they have hull breach on, you multiply 1 plus the hull breach crit bonus is 1.8. So 60,000 times 1.8 is like 100,000, 108,000. It's 108,000. So that's your final weapon damage, and that's really kind of how it's calculated. You know, you can have no critical hit damage bonus, you can have no hull breach bonus on there, and you could still do the numbers. So, but it's kind of crazy, to go from a 30,000 base weapon damage with both to up to 108,000 if you have both hull breach and you have critical hits at the same time. So, and a quick note: hull breach does not affect any type of damage if it is not a critical hit. So it only affects critical hit damage. So that was a really big mouthful, and I'll jump into kind of the tool that I developed to kind of give you guys a better look as to really how that's calculated. And you can kind of play, if you download the spreadsheet, I'm going to make it available on Google Drive, so if you can download the spreadsheet, you can play with your own numbers based off your own research and all that stuff, and you can get to a pretty accurate degree what your weapon damage is. So with that, that's kind of, I was talking about before, the damage officers. There's 2 per faction. So anti-Federation, you've got Krell and Mirik. And the anti-Klingon, you've got Lanar and Tomalak. And then anti-Romulan, you've got Yuki and Yanag. So, the anti-Federation ones, Proc, based off of defense. The anti-Klingon ones proc off of attack, and then the anti-Romulan ones proc off of health. So when you have these type of damage officers on, just keep that in mind, and you can really look at how to max your lower decks with these numbers on, with these officers on. So with that, I think yes, let's go ahead and jump to the calculator really quick. All right, so this is the calculator that I've got open on, I think this is Google Spreadsheets or whatever it is. And I've got all the inputs here. Basically, I put some default inputs on. These numbers right here, min, max weapon damage, are off of my Coronar, I think. Yes, they are off of my Coronar. And then you have a random number here, random number generator. For if you're just doing a comparison purpose, I would suggest you just put in a fixed number, then you can look. So let's just put in a fixed number of 105,000, whatever. So we'll do that. Research bonus, this is the sum of all your research. If you have a ship ability, let's say like a D4, it's a cumulative. You have to put in the current damage per round. So maybe it's like, it's 25. If it's max, it's like 25% per round with breach. So if you have breach and if you had it for 3 rounds, then it might be 75%. And you just put 75% in this box. Projectile bonus. So some of the new projectiles actually have bonuses. There's 2 of them, I think, with weapon damage bonuses. I've got both, so I put 30% down here. Territory bonus. Sadly for me, I do not have any type of territory that gives me a PvP or PvE weapon damage bonus, so that's empty for me. Direct officer bonus. If you have on an officer that does direct, damage, an example would be Carol. You can put in whatever Carol's value is here. Or if you have Decius and you're on, let's say, round 10, then 10%, max Decius is 10% per round. 10% for 10 rounds would be 100. You put 100 down here. Building bonuses. Basically, this is your shuttle bay and operations building. Because I have both, high-level shuttle bay and high-level operations building, I've got 214% damage bonus here. This is your ship attack bonus. This is different by ship, and it's different by whatever loadout you have. So my Coronar right now, my max is 450%, so I've got 450% right here for ship attack bonus. And any type of damage penalty here you can put in. I just put in an example, let's say with Saru. I think a max Saru gets you minus 70% of opponent's weapon damage. So let's say someone was using Saru against me, then I would put 70% in this box right here, and it would subtract it from the total equation. Now this box in orange, which I tried to highlight by itself, was the officer defense stuff. So if you do have on, let's say like a Krell, you would put, the defense sheet. Actually, you should have I shouldn't really call it officer defense. I should have called it officer stat, because the other officers don't proc off of defense. So I think I can change this right now. Let's change it right now. Officer stat. Okay. Total. So we have officer stat total. In this case, it's defense. The officer bonus is 500%. This is based on level. So my Krell is max, so I put 500% here. Critical hit damage, this kind of depends for you. I've got 295% because I've got prime critical hit damage, which is a very, very nifty research. I think it's Ops 43 research or something like that. And it's prime, but still, it's a very nifty research. Be sure to get it. And there's also all sorts of other research in the, let's say, Galaxy tab that kind of affects it. And also, I don't recall if the G4 type research actually affects critical hit damage. I don't think so. There's a couple of others. But anyway, so breach damage, this one I just suggest you don't touch at all because this is constant. It's 80%. So if breach procs, you would have to it would take that number, this number into the calculation. And then I have something else called critical hit damage bonus. This is not really applicable to basically 99% of the people, but we do have G5 research right now, and it's called Section 31 critical hit damage. So as of February, I guess right now, this is the only critical hit damage bonus that procs within the first 2 rounds. So if you have this, then make sure you have whatever percentage, whatever tier that is. It's like 5% per tier. I'm at T2 right now, so I've got 10% bonus from that if it procs in the first 2 rounds of combat. So, the equation here is pretty complicated. If you guys really want to, look at it, you can look at it. But basically, you should also answer the questions here. Is it a critical hit? Is there an active call breach? Is there bonus critical hit damage? Is that active? Because, in this research, actually, that was talking about it, it's only for the first 2 rounds. If it was round 3, it would not be active. So here's the total damage number with all this stuff. And if we look at it, so if we say no, so if we kind of test this out, you can choose no. You see the number goes down a little bit. You say active hull breach, it goes down significantly. Is it critical hits? You say no, and it goes down even more. So this is basically what my base damage is to a hostile, and this is oh yeah. So that's the randomized weapon damage. It would be this to a hostile from this one particular weapon. So you have to look at it by weapon. So for this one particular weapon, this is what the damage would be. And I did kind of verify this with some of my battle logs as well to kind of come up with this little tool. But no, real quick, if you do have critical hit, it's huge. Look at this. So we say critical hit, it goes from 1.7 to 5.1. And then if there's an active hull breach, it jumps from 5 point something to over 9, so 9.3 million damage. So that's a pretty huge bonus. So that's one of the reasons why I think hull breach is pretty overpowering. So but we were kind of talking more about the lower decks portion of it. So should you be maxing it? I mean, it depends on your ship really. And for the G3 epics, actually, what you'll see, I guess, is for the G3 epics, yes, it really makes a lot of sense for you to throw on one of these type of damage officers, especially like, let's say, for PvP. And then if you throw on one of those officers, then it makes a lot of sense for you to really try and max your officer stat bonus over your ship ability bonus, because a ship ability bonus of 270 or 300 compared to let's say a 5,000 difference in defense or whatever the main stack prod is actually this officer stack prod actually wins out for the G3 epics. Now for the G4 type ships where you have much higher base damage, because of the nature of the equation, this type of set number is just not that as significant. And you can see this in a bit in game from the hostile battle logs that I'll show you. But this is not nearly as significant. So and if we took, let's just say we don't have any of these active, no hull breach, no critical hit, it's still 1.7. If I don't have any of these officer stat bonuses, if I just kind of delete one of these, I don't think it matters which one I delete. It's 1.58 versus where I was at before, 1.58 versus 1.75. It's, 100 something, 170,000 type damage. It's good to have, but it's not as important as it was if it was for, let's say, a G3 epic. And a G3 epic, let's say the Auger, the energy weapons on here, it's a max epic is basically in this range. I've been doing this for a while, and I kind of got this memorized. So let's just say your random damage was about 12,400. You see here, your base damage is going to be around 350, 360,000 if you have one of these damage officers. But if you don't have the damage officer, it drops significantly. It goes down to like half of that. Well, not quite half, but like 40% or 60% of what that was, 187,000 damage, as opposed to where we at before, 357,000 damage. So it's significant for the G3 epics, just because your weapon damage by itself is actually not that great, but it's not as significant for the G4 ships. Well, at least not the rares. I haven't really looked at the weapon damage on the uncommons all that much. You guys can do that on your own time if you want to. Just do it with these inputs, kind of figure out what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. So, with that, let's look real quick at some of the in-game battle logs. I'll show you the Auger one first with the G3, and then we'll look at the G4 rare with the Coronar. And we'll see how those two kind of compare. Well, basically, I kind of talked about it and talked to it with the calculator here, but we can see it actually in action against hostiles. All right, so before we jump into the video real quick, let's look at this screenshot. This is basically my crew for the first of the battle logs that we're going to look at real quick. And you can see that my ship ability bonus here is maxed out. They're all at 300%, yet I intentionally left nothing in my lower decks, right? So I've got my Krell up here. He's proccing based off of defense, and defense is right here, 17,699. So I'm going to get a bit of a weapon boost, but I'm not going to get a huge weapon boost. So we'll see how this does. Keep in mind, since this is technically a lower deck video, I've maxed my ship ability, and if I said I maxed my ship ability and that's it, then you will see how it ends up, and it's not going to end very well. All right, so this is the battle log from the screenshot I just showed. So you can see I did a little bit of damage to this heavy freighter, heavy transport, but I still died without killing it. So I've got still a long ways to go. I didn't get through its shields. So let's see, went for 14 rounds. You see, the officers are proccing. You can look at it right here. I pause it so you can see I'm dealing, decent damage. I guess 263,000 damage, 264,000 damage. And, those are the energy weapons are firing. That's the obliterator hit for 1.6 million. You can see here I got my first crit, without any type of, the Krell didn't proc in this case, so without any type of hull breach, the critical hit is at 786,000. Yes, so you see right here, Krell is proccing, and you can see immediately that my critical hit damage jumped up significantly. So whereas before it was 780,000, 822,000, I jumped up to 1.2 million. And that's kind of the power of hull breach right here. It's a huge bonus. So you can see that proc right there. And then after this, I don't think I'm going to go through this entire thing since I blew up. So I just wanted to kind of show you the hull breach damage proc. So this is kind of what happens when you only have the 300%. You're like, oh, I'm good. I have 300%. I don't really need to do anything else. But no, you do, because with Krell here, you have a lot of defense, a lot of open slots in that lower decks that you can stack up with defense to make him do even more damage. And how much more damage can he do? Let's keep watching. All right, so this is basically the second crew I use. I didn't change the crew at all. It's the same thing, except I maxed out my defense. I based it on defense, and I maxed it out on lower decks. And you can see that my defense went from where I was at before, was like 17-something, to about 66,900-ish type defense, okay? And that's because I had some other guys on away team stuff, but whatever. So, I can probably theoretically max out defense at over 70-something thousand, but 66,900 isn't too bad. So this is a lot of defense, and it's really going to help Krell on the damage proc, and it's significantly more, as we'll see in a second. All right, so this is the second battle log from that Auger, and you can see that whereas before I had barely damaged maybe like, a quarter of the heavy transport's health, and I won here. I'll bet, there's some type of, random RNG god play here, because I only had 90k health left, but I still won versus that heavy transport at 24 million with a 6.7 million Auger. And And anyway, so why did I do that? Why did I win? It's because of me loading out my lower decks with max defense, and that really helping Krell, and plus also maybe a couple of lucky critical hits. We'll take a look at the battle log real quick. So you see here the officers are procking. See, I got lucky because I got Krell to proc right off the bat, but I don't know if I actually got any critical hits in round 1. I didn't get critical hits, but you can see right off the bat, whereas before I was doing like 260,000 damage, which isn't bad for an Auger. I'm up to almost 500,000 damage here, all immediately. So that's pretty insane. And yeah, oh, I got lucky on the Obliterator critical. And you can see right here that my critical hit damage is significantly more. It's 1.6 million, whereas before my normal critical hits were in the 770 to like the 800,000, 822,000 mark. And then let's look and see if we can find a proc for Krell. All right, so right here, Krell procs 30%, right? So he's got breach, and that critical hit damage went from like 1.6 to 2.4 million damage. And you can see why I'm saying the critical hit builds, especially with hull breach, is really, really good. So, you know, this is one of the key reasons why I was able to, you know, beat, well, that plus also the lower decks maxing out on defense, why I was able to beat the heavy freighter with an Auger. You can see the damage is just significantly more than where we were at before. All right, so now let's look at the G4 rare ships. I've got my Coronar here. She's a pretty decent powered ship, so I'm going to win versus the heavy transports anyway. So I've got a random, this is actually one of my alternate hostile grinding crews for deep space with the mitigation from 5 and 7. And then I got Marcus just to do a bit more damage to the heavy transports to lower their mitigation. So this is one of my normal crews, and let's see how much damage I'm doing with this crew, just for comparison's sake, because I don't have Krell on here, and then later on I'll have a Krell crew, because we really want to focus on the round 1 energy weapon damages right now. So this one I looked at quite a bit. This is kind of the example that I had shown in the weapon damage calculator on that spreadsheet. So I'm at 1.6, 1.78, 1.64 million in energy damage right off the bat without any type of critical hit or hull breach proc. I won't get any hull breach procs here because I don't have that type of crew set up. So you can see 1.6 is probably around the norm. Do I get any crits? I do get crits. When I get a critical, you can see I'm jumping from basically 1.6 something to 5.7 million damage on the Coronar. So that's a significant jump as well. And I think we'll skip over the rest of this log because there's not much more to it. We'll look at the log from when I have the Krell Captain build, and we'll see how they compare. All right, so now I've got my Coronar crewed with the same crew that I had on my Auger. So Krell Captain, Marcus, and Khan. And let's take a look real quick in terms of if it made a huge difference. My calculator says it shouldn't make a huge difference in terms of weapon damage. All right, so right here you see I do a critical hit damage with the energy weapon, 6.4 million damage. That's a little bit more than what I was at before. My normal weapon damage is 1.78, 1.9, whereas before it's like 1.6, 1.7-ish type damage. So you see I get a decent boost. It's like, a couple 100,000. But when we're looking at such a large base on this, the weapon damage boost here isn't really that important. So and you can see, I'll keep going. If I can get a good proc on here, I'll see. So there's a Krell proc right here. Unfortunately, for me with this type of setup, it's really not going to work for the energy weapon here. It'll work for some of the others. But you see my proc here, I'm at 7 million plus damage with, I think that was one of my, that's one of my bigger guns. That's actually a Kinetic gun. So it does definitely deal a significant amount of damage here. But I think the point is, and what I was really trying to make was that for the G4 rares, the lower deck using the attack damage officers like Krell, it's not really necessarily that important. And it does have a lot of implications for you when you're crewing for PvP. So if you have a G3 epic, as you could see in my previous videos, I kind of crewed them all with the anti-faction and anti-mitigation type builds, and they worked really well. Their damage went up significantly. Yet, however, for the G4 ships, it probably doesn't really make sense to crew them with that type of officer, with the attack damage off, the anti-faction attack damage officers, because their overall contribution is not necessarily as significant. So those are some of the implications that I got from this. And if we talk about solely about how this plays into like the lower deck crewing scenario, let's jump back to the PowerPoint real quick. So basically, I'd say the implications for your lower decks on G3 ships, use your damage officers, especially when you're doing PvP. If you can use these type of very specialized crews and you have more than one G3 ship, then it makes sense for you to have a different type of damage officers and go with the triangle. And then your lower deck should then focus on maxing bonuses for these type of damage officers. It doesn't really make sense for you to really go and max out, let's say, just ship ability. It's just really having the lower decks focus on what your damage officers are really going to give you, because as part of that equation, that greatly offsets, let's say, an extra 30% in ship ability. So that's what it is for G3 ships. For G4 ships, though, it's really around critical hit builds and having breach. And I would say those are probably some of the most important crews to have. And then lower decks, I would say focus on, either maxing the mitigation reduction officers or, and I think I forgot to put that in there, but focus on maxing the new mitigation officers, because we now have new mitigation officers since the duality arc. And how those play out and how those play into it will change depending on who your opponent is, of course. But in terms of a basic crew, I would say you would basically drop those damage officers, the anti-faction damage officers, and kind of look at either having the mitigation reduction officer, or better yet, have both the mitigation reduction officer and the mitigation officer, and if you can, a critical hit type officer. So exactly how those play out, I haven't tested, so those are just kind of theories in my head right now, and I will look at testing them at some point with my G4 Plus ships, and hopefully do some more videos around that. And with that, that's basically the end of the video. So thank you guys for tuning in. I know this is, this is titled more of lower decks, and we ended up focusing more on the attack damage equation. But I think you can't really consider just lower decks by itself, because that's like, let's just max ship ability or whatever. We have to look at it in conjunctions with the type of officers you're using. And if we're thinking about the officers, then we have to understand things like weapon damage and mitigation and all that fun stuff. So that's why I spent so much time today just kind of go over that attack damage equation, and how your officers are really going to work out on that, and for which ships it makes sense to use them, and how to max out those officers with your lower decks. So that's kind of it for today. If you're not a subscriber, please hit the subscribe button, and feel free to leave any comments below. If you check out the calculator and you find any things that's missing, or there's any type of equation that's wrong in that, feel free to drop me a line and I will try and correct it. So thanks so much. Have a good night. Bye-bye.